Hey everybody, welcome to the Trinity Podcast. We're so glad you're joining in with us today. And like always, every week, we're going to go a little deeper into the conversations and the message that we've been sharing as a church on the weekends. Today's going to be a special podcast because we've got some great guests with us today that are going to help out in the conversation. First, I'm joined, as always, with Pastor Tom Messer. Glad to have him with us every single week. But then two special guests today I want to introduce to you, and then you'll hear more from them over the course of the conversation. Jeff Collins. Jeff is a 16-year educator, and he is a Duval County School principal. Special connection and friend of our ministry. Our Oakleaf location for Trinity meets in Enterprise Learning Academy. And so we have a great relationship, not only with Jeff, but with the school system as well. And so, Jeff, we're glad to have you here today. And then TJ Ward is here with us. TJ is a TCA grad, that's right. Been in Jacksonville for a long time. And now he is here. He's the director of advocacy for the Project Opioid project with the Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce, and doing great work in the community. Looking forward to hearing more about that. So guys, hey, we're glad to have you. Glad to have you here today. So listen, Pastor Tom, let's start with you. I think a little context will be good for us, and then we'll probably spend the majority of the time hearing from Jeff and TJ. Why don't you give us a little context, especially for those who may have not been a part of our weekend gatherings, about our conversation about what it looks like for faith, and maybe to kind of capture a theological or God-centered view of the city and the community that God has placed us in, which in our context is Jacksonville, Florida.
Sure. So again, hey, thanks guys for coming to spend this time with us, and really look forward to the conversation. And you know, one of the things that we're really trying to do is get into specific application of, hey, what we do on Sunday can actually impact how we live Monday through Friday. And the gospel ought to be addressing the deepest problems that exist in human life. And we have done this over the years, but we take our summer, we usually just do a kind of a deep dive series. It makes it easy for us to kind of know where we're going. People kind of know what to expect. And this year we did Genesis, first 11 chapters, history of the world. And so, you know, we've been in this thing of, hey, the world's broken through the fall. It's even more broken. You got the flood. And now we're coming to this last week, and we just dealt with the Tower of Babel. And, you know, it seems like, not that God gets angry or frustrated or fed up with us, but it seems like, hey, you know, we are at a point where God's just going to scatter everybody over their doing. And it is easy to be simplistic and say, well, okay, so God doesn't want people to mass together in large cities. That's not necessarily true, because we know there's a lot of good that happens in the city. And in fact, you know, we would advocate that big churches can solve big problems in cities. So we don't think it's the size of the people that gather together. We think it's the focus. And the problem there in the Tower of Babel, as we alluded to yesterday, was the fact that they were trying to make a name for themselves. So what they were trying to do is reach the heavens eternally, reject God while they were on earth. And you know, when you look at a divided world, a broken world that we're living in today, whether it's politically or educationally what you do, or, you know, you talk about just the systemic brokenness of you know, human behavior, human needs, there's a lot going on that people are just rejecting God. And we think that a solution is, hey, let's not make a name for ourselves. Let's build everything that we're doing on the name of God. Let's put Him at the center of what we're doing. And so it's important. It's in, you know, TJ, you know this because you grew up here and were part of it. But we are, you know, we're deeply invested in trying to help, like, the homeless and the addicted. We're in addiction recovery, addiction care. And even though we have a private school, you know, our great advocacy is in public education, because we think education matters on every level. And we're really glad you guys are going to talk about this, because we think that there needs to be solutions, and we think the solutions need to come from the collective effort of the city. It's not just a Christian problem. I say this all the time. Homelessness is not the church's problem. It's the city of Jacksonville's problem. Mm-hmm. Now, we think churches should take the lead and be deeply engaged. Same with addiction, same with education. And what we want to do is kind of talk to you guys today is, how can we do that? How can we do that with a sensitivity that not everybody is a Christian? And how can we do that with a deep commitment to a church to say, hey, this is what Jesus followers do. They do care about, education. They do care about addiction. Addiction touches, we have addiction problems. We have more addiction problems in our church with people that are not in our shelters than we have with people that are in our shelters. The ones in the shelters have just reached a point that's the only thing they can do. We have functional addicts that we're trying to help. And again, education is the same thing. I've been saying this for years in the pulpit, and I've had very direct conversations in our city about this, that there are zip code prisons in our city because there's no way out, because the educational system has failed children. And now I'm sure that's not true at your school, but it's true. Principally, it's true that the great holdback in society for many people in many parts of our city is there's just not the educational opportunities. And I think we should be having a rigorous debate and discussion about, hey, what policies actually work. Mm-hmm. And I think we spend a lot more time arguing about partisanship, a left and right view, than we do about, hey, what's realistically the best thing that we can do. So I think that's the basis of what we want to talk about, or the background to it.
Let's start the conversation at a little bit of a lighter level, and then we're going to kind of talk about the challenges, and then end it on the solutions. All right. Since we are talking about the city, I'd love to hear from you guys. Everybody, just kind of chime in. What do you love about Jacksonville? You're all in the metro area here. So what do you love about our city?
For me personally, I grew up here and then moved away for about 11, 12 years, recently relocated in the last year and a half. And coming back into the city, it's grown quite a bit, since I left. There's a momentum that you can feel that's kind of, tangible, it seems, in many different regards. We were talking about the Jaguars, and, I'm a Jaguars fan. We are the most optimistic fan base in the entire NFL. Every year is our year, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So I just think when you think of, all the growth that's coming to the city, downtown efforts to revitalize and build that, and just the growth that's occurred, it's exciting to be a part of what's happening in Jacksonville.
Yeah. Jeff, what about you? What do you love about the city?
I think this is a very diverse, multicultural city, and when you consider just the greater Jacksonville area as a whole, there are so many fantastic leaders, so many great things that are going on within our city, but also with that comes a lot of resources. And so that's, one thing we try to do in our school is to really be a beacon of hope for the community. And just like the church tries to do, right? So you brought up how education can be an avenue, a pathway for kids to be able to move beyond, maybe their neighborhood, maybe they're living in poverty or a hopeless situation, whether it be a single mom who's working 2 jobs or a single dad who's trying to make ends meet. There's so many great things that we can do to partner not only with churches, but also we want to do that in-house to make an impact on our community.
Cool.
Hey, where are you from, Jeff, originally?
Jacksonville, Florida.
So you're born and raised here?
Right,
Yes, sir.
Can you just tell us a little bit about your pathway to becoming a principal?
Yeah. So I grew up in Duval County Public Schools. I'm a product of DCPS, and graduated high school from Baldwin Middle Senior High.
Did you really?
One of the chief rivals of Trinity
I was about to
Action
say,
Academy.
this could be some bad blood here.
So I had a lot of.
Let me just ask your forgiveness for anything we might have done as a school.
No, I had many, many great friends that attended here, so it's definitely a positive. Went away to school at the University of Florida and got involved with the basketball program there, working camps, and loved it. And long story short, got involved with Edward Waters College here locally as a basketball coach, volunteer assistant, and loved it and wanted to work with young people. And so I was encouraged at the time to get involved in teaching and coaching. And so that's what I did. And then that started me on the track, and then had a principal who really believed in my leadership abilities and encouraged me to get into administration.
How long have you been doing it?
Educator, 16 years, and then this will be my 9th year as principal.
Wow, very cool. Pastor Tom, what do you love about the city? You've been pastoring here a long time.
You know, I'll give you the standard answer I give to everybody. I love the weather. I love the fact that you can play golf 350 days out of 365, and you know, if you want to go to the beach, you can go to the beach. You got the river. I'm not a big South Florida guy, but I love North Florida, and I just love the people, the climate, and I do think the city has improved immensely over the last 20 years. It's just it's really exciting to see the growth and the opportunities that are here.
I was thinking about this as I was walking over here. August, so literally, well, I guess we're in August now, but in the next 2 weeks will be year 19 for me in Jacksonville. I'll have lived here longer than anywhere else in my life. So I consider myself a local. I'll tell you what I love, and I think Jacksonville is underrated. Barbecue. I think the barbecue scene is really strong here. I mean, there's great barbecue if you like it all over the city. And I think it's important because we're going to chat about some of the challenges we face. I think it's important to know, hey, everybody here especially, but in general, we love our city. We're for our city, and I think that goes without saying. But we all each, as families, individuals, our jobs, everything, we have a lot invested in our community, and that's in part why this matters. So let's do this. Let's kind of take a little bit of what I'll call bad news, good news format. And let's kind of start with the challenges, and then we'll kind of end the conversation really positively, looking at where there's hope, and then maybe specifically kind of how the church, people of faith can engage. But you guys each are coming at the dynamics in our city, probably from some overlapping areas, but also from some unique vantage points. And so TJ, let's start with you. And you've been, like we've already said, you've been working on Project Opioid, and feel free to kind of talk about that a little bit. But from your standpoint, what are some of the kind of pressing, kind of urgent, needs that exist in our city that maybe even those listening might not be deeply aware of if it's not touching them, individually?
Yeah, so with Project Opioid, I get to work with a lot of key leaders across the North Florida region to really help reduce overdose deaths. So we, confront the overdose crisis by engaging all sectors of society. I know you mentioned, Pastor Tom, the importance of faith community being involved, and that's one of the things that we're focused on is engaging the faith community, because we see that they're not necessarily as involved in the conversation when it comes to overdose and addiction as they should be. And obviously this is the exception to the rule. Trinity takes a great degree of investment, or puts a great degree of investment into those types of issues. But for us, we're trying to engage all, sectors of society. So faith community, business, government, healthcare, nonprofit, you name it, law enforcement, EMS, fire rescue. And so we bring those leaders together and we work on strategies that will bring about solutions to help reduce overdose deaths, and then to help people that are involved with this issue get the treatment, the resources they need. And so what some of your viewers may not know, if they're not directly impacted by this, is that they are impacted by this. Yeah. Every one of us are, being impacted to a certain degree. But the thing that I would really encourage people to do is educate themselves on the current narrative of the overdose crisis, because of the fact that nobody is immune to this. It's impacting everyone. And so
TJ, talk about that for a second. I've done a little bit of reading about this. One of the unique things, I guess, about this challenge in our city, but it's a national issue, is it's a kind of a no respecter of persons.
Exactly.
Talk about that a little bit.
So there's a stigma that's kind of attached to this, and people maybe even a misconception that it's for or it's affecting people who are down and out, who would be considered down and out, people who are experiencing homelessness or poverty, and it is impacting them, but it's just as much of an issue for those who are, have resources, who are well off. It is no respecter of persons. Every age group, every socioeconomic category, every race and ethnicity is being, impacted by this. And so I think that's the one thing that we try to educate people on is, yes, maybe in the past it was something that targeted a certain demographic, but now because of the fact that fentanyl is in everybody's drug of choice, and fake pills are driving the overdose crisis. And, people are coming off of a 2-year, stretch where mental health was such a struggle for a lot of people. And that's really what this is. It's a mental health crisis that plays itself out through different types of addiction. It just so happens that with overdose and fentanyl being what it is, we see immediate, impact from death, that is occurring. So for us in Duval County, almost 600 deaths last year of overdose, over 8,000 in the state of Florida, over 108,000 across our country. And that's talking about deaths, not overdoses. And so it just has a ripple effect, on families, on churches, on communities. And so that's why we're focused on helping reduce overdose deaths.
So TJ, talk about this a little bit. I'm kind of curious. Of course, I've been involved a little bit from a distance with what you guys are doing, and have had numbers of conversations because it does impact. We're in that chain of, where it starts. We do occasionally have overdoses, and we've had deaths right at our mission, for example. But what talk about the little bit, like you mentioned, you got fire and rescue, you got hospitals involved, you've got health care as far as the health insurance. I mean, it's probably having an economic impact on all of us. In other words, if wherever the chain of custody of who's being cared for, a lot of people can't afford this, or it's being paid for, covered by somebody else. And then engaging our first responders in these kind of things. But beyond the economics, how does it impact the city? What's the effect on Jacksonville as a whole?
Well, if you think about the struggle that so many people have with this issue, it's something that is permeating every aspect of society. And so, for instance, I'm working at Jack's Chamber. The Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce is facilitating this initiative. And so we study the impact on businesses. And in the last year, over 54 million people took some type of illicit drug, and 75% of those 54 million were employed somewhere. So you've got people who are showing up to work.
So it's in the workforce.
It's in the workforce. I mean, you've got people who are showing up to work and they're struggling with this issue. So one of the things we're trying to do is help business leaders understand the impact that it's having on their employees and on their financial, picture for their own business. And so if you think about that in relation to how many different businesses there are in the city of Jacksonville and the economic impact it has, as well as the cultural and social impact, it's everywhere, and it's something that is touching every part of society.
Yeah, see, TJ, I think that's a really important, and not to hyper spiritualize this, but I do think there is a point to be made that that is really kind of illuminating around this particular issue. There is this idea that, hey, individuals or even people collectively, we can just do whatever we want. We can engage in anything we want, and the impacts or the consequences are isolated to ourselves. And yet what this becomes a picture of, and why I think it is such an important reason why we have this kind of broad vision for our community, is the hurt, the pain, the brokenness, the sin within our city has far-reaching impacts, and I do think it's fascinating to me that this project is being driven by the Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce, because I don't think that's a connection most people would make between the overdose crisis and local business. Right. But it's there. I think it's a small example of kind of the far-reaching, kind of consequence of hurt and pain and brokenness that gets left unattended.
Are you finding that business leaders are willing to address the subject, and I mean engage in conversation about it and think through the implication for its workforce?
A lot of them are. Some of them are a little slower to the conversation, and the reason why is because many business leaders are trying to keep their business afloat because of what they experienced with COVID. And we're fortunate here in North Florida that we've been open a lot longer than most areas of the country. So again, another reason to be here in Jacksonville, but and in the state of Florida. But what we're seeing is so many people are struggling with different aspects of their business, retaining employees, hiring people, just even keeping their businesses open, that sometimes they don't have the bandwidth, or the capacity to focus on something else. They care about their employees, And it really depends on the type of organization and the size of organization. So, nonprofits will understand this and be more sensitive to it. Larger organizations have capacity to deal with it right away. Smaller businesses sometimes struggle a little bit.
Not sure where they fit into
exactly.
The whole conversation.
And so what we've tried to do is create on-ramps for, every type of business to be able to engage in this, and to have some things they can do and put in place that are practical things that will make a difference.
It's funny I'll just say this very, very candidly and directly, but and I've been involved in so many city conversations, in the last 30 years and probably in the last 20 years more specifically. But my sense would be that the health insurance providers have a real deep interest in this because it's driving their cost of providing insurance up. And what's going to engage the employer over this issue is it's a cost control measure. It is going to impact their bottom line.
Yeah.
And then what happens is when you put real people, when you put real stories in it, and then you realize all of a sudden, hey, these people that are working for me may not be them, but it's somebody in their family that they're, so they're not as capable of an employee. And that's where it spills over into the community's issue is, we're living among people that are experiencing deep loss, deep grief, deep heartache, deep pain, and they don't know where to turn.
No, you're 100% right. And when you think about, I mentioned the ripple effect, you have, these deaths that have occurred, or even the people who are, held captive by this disease, who have family members who are dealing with this, have, coworkers who have to deal with the impacts that are, coming as a result of this, circles of friends. So it really does get much larger than just the person who is struggling or the overdose death that has occurred. And family members, I've had the unfortunate privilege of sitting down with people who have lost children to this. They're never the same. Doesn't matter how long it's been since they've lost their child, they'll never be the same. And so, that has that ripple effect that goes out. And so we do see a lot of struggle that comes from this, but I also look at it as tremendous opportunity, especially from, for people of faith to be able to engage in a way that is more compassionate, more, grace-filled, understanding and educating themselves on the fact that this is not a moral issue. It really is a disease. This synthetic drug that people are taking rewires their brain to the point that they become somebody they've never intended to be. And so I think the stigma that's attached to it and educating ourselves on, how we can interact with people who are struggling with this is something very practical that anybody can do, but especially people who would say that they're followers of Jesus and are called to care for people in their city who, maybe are struggling, how you can make a difference, make your city better.
Well, I think that's why conversations like this are so important, especially for the church. Jeff, kind of shift from your vantage point. So we've already said this, obviously you're a principal in the Duval County public school system. And I know, obviously, your primary focus, as it should be, is education. My wife's a public school teacher, so I also have kind of a front row seat of this. But I also know in your job, you guys are not only educators, you're family counselors. You're providing food for kids and families, and sometimes in some cases, it's the only meal that the kids might get over the course of a day. You see it all, I'm sure, of all kinds. So talk about that. I know you love our city, but from your vantage point, what are some of the challenges we're facing in our community?
Absolutely. I like to consider ourselves to be called hope dealers. So that's what we deal with. Yeah. We deal in hope. But many of our kids and families, and a lot of this came to light in light of COVID. I can't tell you the number of families that reached out to me and contacted me with just a myriad of concerns and issues that were going on that they were facing at that time. And now it seems to be more economically based. So you've got, like I said, I got a lot of single parents who are working multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet. And oftentimes kids are at home by themselves. And as I'm talking right now, I have a 5th grade student coming to mind. And I would always ask him, I'd see him on Friday, and I would say, what are you planning to do this weekend? And he would say, I don't know. And he would share with me that his mom worked all weekend. So here he is at home by himself, 10, 11 years old. So those are the kind of things we're dealing with. When you look at education as being an opportunity or pathway in our community, it really comes down to having kids being able to read on grade level. The data out there and the research suggests that kids that can't read at 3rd grade, they're not reading at 10th grade. So we can go ahead and predict with almost 88% accuracy that if we have a child who's reading below grade level in 3rd grade, they're not going to be reading on grade level in 10th. And
Is
we
that
know,
your key metric?
I would say absolutely. I think as a school, other than safety, there's no more important priority than ensuring all our kids are being able to read on grade level.
So just, again, the one thing I enjoy about pastoring here is somehow we dabble in everything,
Yeah.
And I tell people I feel bad sometimes. I really don't feel like I do a lot of pastoring. It's all this other stuff that we are engaged in. But so when you look at that and you talk about reading on grade level, talk about the ability to read on grade level and then the comprehension part of that, because I think it actually gets into their ability to take that information and do something with it. It's the processing of that. So,
yeah, we always say in K through 2, they're basically learning how to read, right? And then 3 through 5, they're reading to learn. And so when you have students that are not able to read in intermediate grades, I mean, it really sets them back. And there's a lot of different things that we can do to fix the problem. A lot of that is getting, small group instruction, eyeball to eyeball with kids and having additional intervention earlier. And that's something that we're trying to really focus on. We have a robust program that we're implementing K-5, that we're doing to try to make an impact, make a difference. But there's also, when you think about attendance issues, so I'm coming out of COVID years where I had 33% of my entire student population that missed half of 9 weeks. So that's a lot of school that's being missed, and so that over time, which I have those examples of children that have missed an entire school year and they're only at 3rd grade.
hey, do this for me. I was curious. My dad was a public educator, 37 years, I think, in public school, and I'm a product of public school education. And I think Daniel and I were talking about this before. Sometimes the church has a view of public education's bad, Christian education's good, homeschooling's better, and I think even unfairly, but not without some legitimacy, the public school sometimes gets a black eye. What are the 2 or 3 best things about public education in Jacksonville? And I know that's a hard kind of, but I think my point is that public education should matter. Even though my kids went to Christian school, it should matter, and it should matter deeply to us that public education is effective and successful. But we often only hear the negative.
Sure.
It's always, a legislative issue, or it's a performance in a school issue, or, you get a lot more about the underperforming schools than you do. So tell us 2 or 3 good things about public education in Northeast Florida.
Teachers and students, that's what it comes down to. I have an amazing staff, teachers that put in hours well after the school day is finished, outside of their contract, teachers that are so committed to being champions for children. And when you're working in a diverse, because we do have a pretty diverse population at the school that I'm at, and that's going to bring a number of different needs, whether you've got English speakers of other languages who they're learning to speak English or just coming, to Florida, to America, whether you have students that are 1 or 2 years behind, whether you have affluent students. There's all kind of different needs that a teacher is trying to meet in that one classroom. And then you get into the higher levels and there's departmentalization, so they see multiple groups throughout the day. But teachers do a wonderful job of just trying to meet the needs of all students. And not only that, but to partner to partner with families. We always say we're not enrolling a student, we're enrolling a family, you know, and so that's what we want to do. We want to be partners with them. And then I think just our students have so much potential. And that's the thing that keeps me young. I may not look it on the outside, but on the inside, I feel pretty young. And just working with them, and they have so much unlimited potential, but just their hopes and dreams. And as an educator and as a Christ follower, you want to cultivate that, man. You want to give kids opportunities for success, to excel, and to be productive citizens in our society.
That's awesome.
TJ, kind of actually along the same lines, and you use this word, so I'm going to kind of pitch it back at you. Especially looking at the overdose crisis, you know, which is bleak, you know, in and of itself. What are the opportunities you're seeing, even as you've kind of engaged in this work? Where's the silver lining? Where are things moving in the right direction that like Tom said, they're not usually in the headlines? You know, the bad news is in the headlines. Where's the progress being made?
So the thing that I see, especially here in North Florida, that's a little different than even other parts of the state, because I get to work with colleagues all across the state of Florida, is this desire to collaborate between all different sectors. I mentioned all the different leaders that we're working with, and there is a desire to come together to find solutions, to implement, you know, strategies that will eventually make a difference. I honestly believe, and this is kind of on the bleak side, but it will probably get worse before it gets better. However, you have good people who care about the city, the people, the residents in the city, that are working together to try to come up with some solutions that will eventually make a big impact, and really are making immediate impact. But the issue's so overwhelming at this point that sometimes it feels like there's little progress being made, but there's a foundation that's being laid that I think will allow us to see some good things happen down the road. So I'm grateful for the collaboration that occurs here in North Florida.
You're actually doing some things in public schools too, right?
Yes, we're working with some, and we have partnerships. One of the things I should say is we're not a treatment provider, but we collaborate with a lot of different organizations that have been doing this work, nonprofits specifically that have done this for a while. Our initiative's about 1.5 years old, so we're kind of new to it. But because of the connection to the chamber, because of, you know, the fact that we're funded by the Florida Blue Foundation, there's already some trust there with those organizations. So we've been able to see some things happen quickly through our initiative. And one of the things that we've seen is just some of these nonprofits that have been doing this work for the longest time, you know, are encouraged by what they're seeing. And so, you know, we're excited to be able to partner with them to kind of make a difference in the areas in which we can, bringing, you know, people into the conversation. Like I mentioned, faith leaders, faith organizations, businesses, to really impact what's happening.
You know, I think it's probably appropriate, and you alluded to it, Jeff, but it's probably appropriate that we just keep reminding ourselves too that COVID was an unusual situation. And, you know, and again, from my role, you know, sometimes I get to see the best of people and the worst of people. I hardly ever see the middle. You know, I see it when things are really good in their life and, you know, it's a wedding or, you know, a celebration or something, or when things are really not good in their life. And I know you've experienced it because we've talked through this as well, but we've probably recommended more people to mental health counseling, and underlying root causes in that mental health issue has been, you know, what I would call gateway drug usage, kind of dabbling in some kind of deal. And a lot of it was born out of, you know, kids were locked away during the pandemic, or they were unattended, or, you know, it's just, and that became a kind of catalyst to this kind of problem. So it may be a little bit of an unusual time that we're living in, but it's also an opportunity to address really core issues and get maybe a better handle on the conversations that we need to be having, which will ultimately lead, I think, to better treatment programs or better plans to get people the help that they need. I guess I should say it that way. But so, and I guess my point would be this, TJ, are you seeing opioid use in young children, teenagers? Where is it predominant?
So it's predominant in young adults, that millennial age group, the Gen Z even age group. And so we actually have a social media campaign that's launching here in the next couple of weeks targeting Gen Z to help them become aware of the crisis, because so many young people are dying of overdose deaths. And again, a lot of it has to do with trying to cope with the things that you mentioned, the mental health issues. I mean, all of us were impacted to a certain degree by COVID, and it's impacted our mental state to some degree, no matter how good you had it during that time period. And so many people have struggled with that, so they reach out for a prescription med to try to help handle what they're going through, the loss that they experienced during COVID, whether it be a job or a loved one, even more seriously. And just the isolation, the separation, we saw a skyrocketing effect of overdose during that time period. And so, you think about young people who are trying to figure out how to cope with some of those things, and they're reaching out for prescription meds, oftentimes buying them off the streets. These meds are laced with fentanyl, so they're not trying to necessarily even get high to experience a fun situation. They're just trying to escape their reality, which has become too much for them to bear. So going back to the mental health crisis, that's really what this whole thing is. And then it kind of plays itself out through a lot of different types of addiction. We just hear more about overdoses now because those are the ones that are killing immediately. And so I'm right there with you. I think we need more education on the fact that, mental health issues are not something that that we should look down on, that people should be able to get the help they need, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not. It's not enough to say, well, I'm a Christian and so I should be able to handle this on my own. No, you need some people to help you process these things in certain cases. So
you both have alluded to this, and I again, I think we see it too and have to wrestle with it. But when you talk about single parents and so a single parent with a child, and then you talk about we don't enroll students, we enroll families, and I'm sure your issues are you're helping families. I mean, I've sat through some of your presentations where you've interviewed parents of who've lost kids to overdose, or children, even adult age children to overdose, and so what would you say if families were listening to us? What's the one thing or the couple things that parents can do, even with Gen Z kids who are not younger, and what can a single parent do that's stressed out of their mind? What are the options for them, and how do we? Because we speak to parents every week,
sure,
and how do we? What message should we be sending to kids or to parents about how do you help your kids with challenges in education, temptations and struggles around opioid use? What would be that message if you could say anything to parents?
I think the biggest thing that parents can do for their children is to spend time with them and to invest time in them. So many times I see wanting to work to give them things rather than invest that time in them. When you're talking educationally, it would be reading to their children, reading with their children, having conversations about their day. And I have many great families at my school, and I have a lot of parents who serve on our school advisory council and volunteer and those type of things. But it hurts your heart, as a dad as well as an educator, when you have that car pull up in the car rider line and the music's just blaring and the kid's it's like, just get in and be quiet, and you just wonder what kind of home they're going to, So I think the biggest thing is being able to stay involved in their lives and just to really show the kid that they're loved, because that helps them to feel protected. It's going to help them to be have self-esteem and be confident, and really cut down on a lot of mental health issues, because as TJ pointed out, man, we saw mental health soar in terms of our elementary population during COVID. I mean, these kids, it was one of the worst things that could have happened to them. And that was probably one of the highlights of last school year, was return to face-to-face instruction. I think it was good not only for the adults in the building, but I think it was immeasurable for the students.
Yeah, I would piggyback on what he said and just tell parents you need to talk to your kids.
Yeah.
You need to help them understand that this whole overdose situation is different than it's ever been. So, when we were growing up, all of us at this table, I don't know how old you are, but all of us, drugs have never been a good idea.
Yeah.
Illicit drugs, right? Right? We could say that, but we went through that whole, say no to drugs. This is your brain on drugs. And, if you touch a drug, you're going to suffer for the rest of your life. Well, a lot of people came out of that and are like, that experimented with drugs, and they're like, I'm okay. I'm productive now. I'm a good parent. So not advocating for that at all, but nowadays you cannot experiment with drugs because of the way things, are happening with fentanyl and the fact that it can kill instantly and does kill oftentimes instantly. The message is to your kids, don't mess with drugs. And so when we were here talking to the academy a few weeks back, our approach was, look, we know that your kids, I sat where they sat, when people came in to tell me not to do stuff, it made me want to do it even more. So we want to equip you and empower you to make good choices. We believe in you that you can make good decisions, but just know that this is the current situation. If you experiment, there's a good chance you could die. And I know that sounds like a bleak message, but it really is the thing that we need to be communicating. Parents need to talk to their kids about it. Sometimes parents think my kids aren't listening. We know the opposite just from talking with young people. And you're right. It's as low as middle school now. We've seen 13-year-olds die of an overdose death. So 13 all the way up, to 40. In fact, 18 to 40, the leading cause of death is overdose, more so than homicides and car accidents combined now, which it's never been like that until this point. The other thing I would say to parents is look at your kid's phone. I know that's controversial, but the way that these drugs are being sold now is through social media, which is why we are launching that social media campaign. But Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, drug dealers are on there communicating, and a lot of the parents that we've talked to, they have their kid's phone, the ones who've lost children, they have their kid's phone and they can show you conversations between the drug dealer and the child or the young adult where they bought drugs through, a social media platform. So look at your kid's phone, and know what they're doing. There's, kind of a way I think you can approach conversations like that, but our job as parents is to make sure our kids are safe as much as possible and to continue that relationship with them. So I think there's a way to do it right and in a way that's not as favorable to do it. But I would just stay very involved with their kids and have conversations with them.
That's helpful. Hey, listen, let's land the plane with this kind of final question. And we need to be a little brief just for the sake of time here. But I'm going to kind of give you guys both literally and figuratively an open mic here to speak back to the church. And Pastor Tom and I have the privilege of doing that every weekend. So they hear from us on the regular. But I think it's helpful sometimes to hear from a different voice. Again, kind of restating our whole context for this conversation is that God cares about our communities. God cares about our city. The church should be engaged. And so, and Jeff, we'll kind of start with you. What would you like to say to people of faith and maybe, the local churches in our community about either, you can be as practical or principled, however you want to, address it as you want to, about how they can engage with the school system, the chamber, and how can they engage with the leading institutions in our city that are doing good and trying to help our city be better? How can the church be a part of that?
Well, Daniel, I just want to say thank you because Trinity at Oakleaf is already fully engaged, at our school and just a tremendous partner that we have, and not only supplying resources, being able to keep morale high for our teachers, but also just in terms of volunteering and all the different things that you all do to campus beautification. I know you are getting ready to have like a serve day where you're coming out to beautify our campus. All of that matters. And then when you think about mentoring programs and other opportunities to serve in local schools, I mean, the possibilities are really endless. So it's really about being the hands and feet of Jesus, right? So if we want to put that into action, I would encourage your members, if they run into an administrator or at a school where they're being turned away, we would open our doors to them. And I know there are many of my colleagues that feel the same way.
Hey, let me just add, just kind of as a personal note there. One of the things I think around, and you kind of alluded to this, that was the conversation we were having earlier, and this is true about Clay County as well. We've got good relationships, but the Duval County Public School System, over the last 8 years that we've been deeply engaged at this level, we meet in a Duval County public school, but in general, every year they have expressed just an incredible warmth and openness. I'm talking about at a district level to local churches. And, whatever the stigmas are about, hey, the schools don't want the churches involved, we've never found that to be true. They welcome and receive. And so it's been a really great partnership.
It seems like you're pretty comfortable embracing and expressing being a Christ follower as the principal. Do you find that is that received well in the context of your professional life?
Yeah, so it's a little different context than what you have on Sunday, but in terms of how I live my faith and how I am as far as a person and character, I just try to let him live through me.
That's awesome.
I think teachers, staff, parents see that. And I would say for the most part it's well received. Yeah. Yes, sir.
TJ, how about you? Kind of if you could speak either to individuals or the Big C Church, kind of how can they step up, or how can we get involved?
I think something everybody can do, and I may have alluded to it a little bit ago, is just showing compassion to people who are going through this. And it really is an opportunity for the church to do what it should be doing all the time, which is, extending grace to people who are struggling. I grew up here at Trinity for the better part of my life, and I know that's the heartbeat of Pastor Tom. So, and the fact that you already have some built-in opportunities to really serve, people who are struggling in this issue, just get involved on whatever level you can, but at the very least, maybe have a mindset of compassion and grace toward people who are struggling, and even family members of those, who are struggling with this issue, because they need support and they need encouragement just as much as the person who's struggling.
Yeah, that's good. Guys, listen, I really appreciated the conversation. I think just having the conversation is so helpful and goes a long way to kind of elevating a vision that God that includes us, but is also bigger than us, that God has. And so Jeff, TJ, appreciate your time joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
And we are really thankful for your time with us. Hey, listen, if you are a regular listener, we appreciate you joining us today. If this is your first time, we'd encourage you to like or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. We'll talk to you again next week.